Good day, ladies and gents, wherever you may be around the world, and welcome to Splendid Isolation number 154, our first stream of 2024. As always, I'm going to start us off with a tune. Assuming it works. Bum, 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 bum.
As ye bring exile to serve your captives dear, take up the white man's burden, the savage wars of peace, and bid the sickness rest, the end for all the soul. What's love that Eden was? Wherein no total rule of kings, but toil of serf and sweet. The tale of common fear, the roads ye shall not tread. Go make them with your dear. And mark them with your dead, and reap his old reward, the cry of horse ye human, are slowly towards the dark. Why brought ye us from paradise? Man, ye dare not stoop to less, nor call to loud. Freedom to clothe your weariness, and leave or do the sign of God and you. Take on with childish tale, how to search your manhood. No words would give what with the judgment of your peers. Take off the white man's and true. All the fantasy.
Okay, and that was, of course, the excellent Chris Gard with his musical version of The White Man's Burden, which is a Rudyard Kipling poem, and I believe Panama Hat also had something to do with making that. Do go and check those guys out on YouTube. Before we start the show properly today, I just first of all hope everyone had an excellent Christmas and is having a good New Year so far. And I would also like to point out, if there's any problems with this particular stream, my computer died yesterday afternoon, and this is actually a borrowed computer that I borrowed from a neighbor friend of mine. And so if there's any problems on it, it'll be because this is a borrowed computer and not the one I normally use. I will have to get a new computer at some stage in next week. Okay, good evening to my guests, Mitch and Armin. How are you going today, guys?
Yeah, all good on my end.
Mitch?
Same old.
As always. All right, so did either of you had a first topic that you would like to bring up this week for our first stream for 2024?
Someone asked me to bring something, what it is. Other than that, I've actually got nothing. There was that poor boy that was stabbed over New Year, but there really isn't enough information about that yet to really say anything on it.
No.
There's the footballer spurging out. There's like the big football, the football establishment kicking off because Joey Barton had a bit of a spurg out, a reasonable spurg out about women pundits commenting on men's football,
which is perfectly reasonable.
Yeah, and then he pointed out that he took to Twitter afterwards. There was a bit of a lashing over it, and Jeremy Vine sort of like was jumping in on him. So he then brought up that Jeremy Vine, during the COVID stuff, talked about, or the COOF stuff, I should say, talked about like holding people down and jabbing them by force. And
Lovely.
So then apparently this has led to like Jeremy Vine getting death threats and having people following him around. And he's so he was coming out and saying, "Oh, this is what misinformation is," but he hasn't. I don't know what the original context of the quote was. Maybe it was misinformation. I don't know. But yeah, Big Football's come out against him. ITV's made a statement against him.
Are they still taking the knee out? I'm not a football fan, so I don't watch it. I don't watch any sports ball anymore. Like I used to be dead keen on like Test cricket and rugby union, but I don't even watch those anymore. So I certainly don't watch football. I'm just wondering if they're still taking the knee like the idiots were last year. So.
Yeah, I have no idea. I haven't been watching any football, so.
Mitchy doesn't sound like he's roboting for me, I've got to say.
Anyone else? Because I did have a problem with my headset and my computer today.
You're not roboting for me, mate. I can hear you perfectly.
Yeah, I can hear you. I can hear Duke perfectly. It's just for some reason Ataman is like cutting out roboting.
Well, perhaps
I might leave and come back in.
Yeah, you can do that.
Give me like a minute. I'll be back in.
Yeah, no worries. Mitch, did you have a first topic you wanted to bring up?
I haven't really kept up to date with the war in Ukraine, other than they're talking about lowering the draft limit from 27 to 25 for some reason, even though everyone knows they're really scraping the barrel lately. Because if anyone saw that video of a Down syndrome,
that poor bugger. The Ukrainian soldiers were kicking him around and stuff. Yeah, no, I saw that.
You know, he's jumped. Well, I just came across as very like neurotic, and overall the kind of soldier you just wouldn't want in a trench because you just feel like he'd shit himself in actual trench warfare.
Well, I mean, the thing is, the guy's mentally retarded. I mean, he just is. You know, special needs, as they say these days. But I mean, he doesn't belong in a frontline trench, obviously. And it is just because, as you say, Mitch, the Ukrainians are scraping the bottom of the barrel. I mean, they're even saying they're going to put guys in the front line who have been castrated explosively. You know, blokes who've lost their sex organs because of an explosion. And they're saying those guys they're going to put back in the front line, which to me is just utterly ridiculous.
I mean, I can understand like from a civilization perspective of, oh well, those guys can't have any children, any more children, so I can understand the ruthlessness towards those men. Doesn't mean it's a good thing at all. I'm just saying I can understand.
Yeah, but I mean, they're
civilization.
they're also talking about people who've lost a hand or a foot. They're going to
Oh,
put them in the
I thought you said
military.
people.
Obviously, not in the front line, but they're going to put them in the military. It's just craziness, you know.
Yeah, I mean, at the very most, like an amputee, you can totally imagine them just, I don't know, providing advice to a general. That's the furthest.
Yeah,
can imagine it
and
go.
you know, in the past, there's been, I mean, Nelson, famous example. You know, you can lose your arm and still be an effective officer. Certainly, I don't think you could be an effective non-commissioned dude, but you can be an effective officer still. But you know, those guys will volunteer anyway. You know,
Well, yeah, that's the thing. Well,
those
I've
sort of
also
guys will
heard.
volunteer in any case. So you won't need to bloody well conscript them. How are you going, Armin?
Yeah, good. Any better now?
Yeah, you're not welcome for me at all.
But Mitch, does he sound better to you?
Yeah, I can hear him perfectly.
Nice.
All right, cool. Excellent. If anyone in the chat has got problems hearing any of us, just tell us in the chat, guys. But please don't go overboard, because I see this on streams all the time. There's some slight problem and 15 people will mention it. And really, sorry, boys, this is a borrowed computer. I'm not going to be able to fix it. So,
yeah. I mean, the only other thing I'm hearing is I'm hearing like apparently there's loads of Western Ukrainian families where, because of the draft officers around, like they won't even let their young lads go out just to go shopping, because.
Well, I mean, they're raiding nightclubs and stuff, aren't they, Mitch?
Well, yeah, it's like you get young lads who are now probably hiding in like lofts and basements and whatnot, just to avoid the draft officers. Which
do you know also, Mitch, if it's true? You know Gonzalo Lira, the Coach Red Pill dude, who I am no big fan of.
Last I heard, he was like, I can't remember, it was like 14 years in prison or something.
13 years, that's what I heard. Yeah, it was 13 years.
Yeah, 13
which is
or 14.
Ridiculous. Well, you know, it doesn't make much difference. But it's ridiculous, frankly, for what he was doing.
I mean, he's a racial foreigner to that country, and he's agitating for the country. Like, he's agitating for Russia in a country that is at war with Russia. You can
he was an idiot not to get out. I mean, you know, he sent his wife and kids away very sensibly, but why the hell didn't he follow them?
Well, that's the thing.
I think it was somebody on, maybe it was Endeavour, actually. You know, Endeavour, who's a quite good Canadian dude who's in our sphere. He said he was in Ukraine at one stage and he just got out because, you know, you got to take this shit seriously. You don't stay in places where there's a serious war going on if you're going to be talking in favor of the other side. And Coach Red Pill was an idiot not to just get out and then maybe go to Russia, you know? Well, he would have been fine.
On one hand, you can imagine the Ukrainians would have wanted to nab him, well, just because he's like kind of like a Lord Haw sort of character.
But what I mean, Mitch, is if he'd have got out before he started doing these podcasts about the war, as soon as the operation started and the Russians went into Ukraine, he should have said, "Right, I'm out of here." That's my view.
Yeah, that's what. Yeah, Borden Banquet has a video where he was in Kiev on the day the war broke out, and he skedaddled quick as a flick.
Quite right, because they would have said, although he got banned from Russia later on because of one of his mates, I believe, things he did.
Yeah, that Johnny fellow.
But he would definitely have been nabbed by the Ukrainians because he would have been considered pro-Russian because he used to do so much stuff in Russia, you know.
Well, I mean, he's done a lot of stuff in Ukraine and Belarus as well. That's the thing. So I don't know if he'd be considered pro-Russia. Although, if you look at his comments, I mean, he'll talk about woke. He'll talk about how Mongolia is better than Britain because they don't hate themselves over there, which is fair enough.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, you get people
I
saying.
mean, the thing you said, Mitch, that you haven't really kept up with it over the last week or so, and I don't blame you. I'm the same because we all had stuff we were doing over the Christmas and New Year era. But I mean, the thing that is just becoming increasingly clear is that Russia is really quite decisively winning now. It really is.
Yeah. I mean, the one thing I'm taking note of is, so last Christmas, the Russians did a Christmas truce where only where it was unilaterally them ceasing battling on the Ukrainians. I've not heard anything about that from the Russian side this year, so it looks like the Russian establishment as well, they're really starting to go mercilessly on the Ukraine.
There are people on Twitter, on X, who I follow, who are they're not NATO twats. They're not like these fanatical pro-Ukrainians, but they were broadly pro-Ukraine. And even these guys are saying, the only thing that makes sense for Ukraine to do now is to beg for peace talks and hope that Putin doesn't ask for too much, basically. I remember I said to one bloke, I think that Putin will ask certainly for all the oblasts, which the Russians are in, but he will also almost certainly ask for Odessa and the Black Sea coast, and they have to, because that's the only way to make Sevastopol, the Russian naval base in the Crimea, secure, is to take away the Ukrainians' access to the coast. You have to do that, and Odessa is a ethnically Russian city for the most part.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, you have, broadly, the past month has just seen Ukrainians just abandoning, I won't say huge chunks of land, but like, you're talking quite a few miles of land, because it's just looking like the Ukrainians don't exactly have the supplies anymore to staying in their defensive positions like they did, say, a year ago, when they still had the Western aid never ever drying up. However, they've only just had the last aid package flow in, and until Congress agrees on another one, Ukraine's not going to get any more aid for the time being.
And of course, the Americans are also trying to send aid to Israel at the moment, of course. And if in the balance in American politics between Israel and Ukraine, Israel wins every single time, hands out. So
Yeah, and so you have, I believe for Ukrainians, they tacitly admitted that in a space of a month, they have 20,000 losses they have to replace to keep all their battalions and brigades up to strength. So that's like 20,000 casualties, dead, maimed, wounded so badly that they have to be taken up the line and replaced with someone else. So that's why there's this talk about drafting in another 500,000 men. However, it's going to be a real point where I go, the Ukrainian lines are probably going to crumble in one sector or another at some point throughout this year.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know when it will happen. Perhaps it could be midway through the summer, could be by the winter's time, but there will be certainly a sector that just cracks.
And once that happens, they're stuffed. Once that happens, once there's a breakthrough somewhere, like a serious one, then the Ukrainians are not going to be able to plug it, because they haven't got the reserves to plug it, and they don't have enough ammunition, and Russia has total air superiority, and a few old F-16s are not going to change that, in my opinion. But whatever.
Well, it's not bad. It's just to be a bit heavy air defense use on both sides. I mean, Russian air defense is a lot more potent than it was when it was a year ago, and you got the Ukrainians who, I'm pretty sure their anti-air assets are also drawing up as well. Because I mean, you get these like drone strikes attacking Kiev, and they're allowed to just you'll see an air defense missile just like a Patriot just land in the middle of a Dnieper River, rather than actually intercept the missile coming in or the drone.
Yep. They've even been damaging their own buildings with the damn things. But yeah,
it's like you get this whole thing about apartments getting bombed, and I go, the thing is, there's either two explanations for either, or perhaps three. You got one because they put the anti-air weaponry in the middle of a city, let's say
because they're trying the Russian, because that makes it more difficult for the Russians to knock it out, which is why they do that, of course.
Yeah, it's not just that
because the Russians are trying not to kill as the Russians are definitely trying to minimize civilian casualties as much as they can.
Yeah, it's not just that. I mean, the apartment buildings probably provide some cover, I suppose. I mean, it doesn't really work well with satellites, but still, like I can imagine it stops horizontal strikes from
Yeah,
missile, I suppose.
I mean, I do.
Yeah,
I've seen reports that Israel has killed about 17,000 Palestinians. I don't know how true that is. None of us do.
I was
But
expecting higher, to be honest.
Well, it might be higher now because this was like well before Christmas. But I don't think even the Ukrainians are claiming that the Russians have killed 17,000 Ukrainians because there's only 8.
Well,
civilians. I'm talking about civilians, not.
Well, you have some Naval types during the siege of Mariupol claim that the Russians killed off like 200,000 civilians.
Absolute nonsense, of course, but yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't even think there was 200,000 civilians in Mariupol to begin with. I think that was like the entire population.
Of course not. It's not. It wasn't. Half of these places that they're fighting over are at best small towns. Some of them are small towns. A lot of them are villages, basically.
Yeah, so it's like you can't exactly. And you talk about. I mean, I think it was like I can't remember if it was the UN or some organization like that that's calculated like 9,000 back in September from the start of the war up until that particular September. In a year and a half.
That's like 2.5 years or whatever it is now. So quite a long time anyway.
Yeah, so like 9,000 in that space of time. It quite clearly shows if the Russians really were perpetrating a genocide,
which they're not.
You think it'd be closer to 900,000 or something.
Well, I mean, look how many civilians were killed in Iraq or Afghanistan by American and British forces mainly, but also loads of other Western people, and you get figures like certainly 50,000 is a pretty common figure you hear. So I mean, admittedly over like the best part of 20 years, but even so, that's a lot of dead civilians.
Yeah, I don't know how there's so many dead civilians in Iraq, because I don't think I can imagine the opening is like the first month of the war where we bombed Baghdad. I can imagine that there's a lot of heavy civilian casualties, but I can't imagine like 1 million unless it was just like I don't know. Can't imagine it being 1 million for argument's sake. I mean,
to me, it's impossible now to argue that Russia is not winning this war and winning it more and more increasingly clearly, as far as I'm concerned, anyway.
Well, I mean, you do get some of the Nafatobs of that in Visegrad 24 who still believe in this fantasy of like Putin going to The Hague.
Yeah, it's not going to happen.
Why not? Well, it's not that. I mean, it's just I know. It's like it's the same as that meme of the Chinese want to invade the Russian Far East, and you're just thinking, well, why would they do that? Because they get nuked.
Did you, Mitch? Did you watch that video by that guy who runs the Britannia channel? I think it's called Britannia.
Oh, Callum.
He's one of Sargon's dudes, I believe he is.
Yeah.
And he travelled all over Russia recently, and like the place seems to be doing pretty good to me from that video.
Well, I mean, he even said like Moscow has a lot better planning in terms of how the metro stations are run, how cities are all designed. Because I mean, I don't know if it's just because I've got no great love for cities to begin with, so I'm not really best guy to ask.
Yeah, I prefer the countryside, I must say.
Yeah, because like you take a lot of British cities, but I mean, the comparative sense they're shitholes compared to Russian ones, because the Russian ones generally tend to have. I mean, in Eastern Europe in general, like Hungary and Poland, we've seen like communist apartment blocks or whatever just get replaced by old, say, 19th century style architecture or whatever. Like you can see, you will see like photos of Budapest where these old commie blocks get replaced by like apartment blocks, but they're inspired much more by like the 19th century sort of architecture.
The other thing, Mitch, on that dude's video that I thought was quite impressive was the number of old churches and what have you in Russia, which have been rebuilt like in the 2000s, but rebuilt as they originally looked, not rebuilt as a modern, vile building like nearly everything that's put up in the West today. They were rebuilt in a traditional manner that is very attractive. So, you know.
Yeah, I've heard that the Orthodox Church has been doing well since the fall of the Soviet Union. I mean, to be fair, it was like dark circumstances at first because I mean, a lot of people saw solace in the church given the economic difficulties of the 90s. However, since then, it's like the Orthodox Church enjoys a lot of power. I think, like, I mean,
Well, I noticed, Mitch. You will have seen this because because you speak some Russian and stuff. I even noticed in Russian movies from like Russian films from any time after the fall of the communists. Even when they make quite a lot of like World War II movies, obviously because it was a big deal, the so-called Great Patriotic War, and you know Russia lost more people in that war than anyone else, as far as I'm aware. So naturally, it's a big deal. Although obviously the survivors from that who are mostly little old ladies now, to be honest, because women live longer and also didn't get killed in the war so much. But these people obviously regard this as really very, very important, and like just like every little British town and sometimes village has its war memorial from World War One and World War Two. Every single Russian town and city and what have you has a war memorial. Same kind of thing, you know. And so this is a really big deal for the Russians, obviously. But it's not really about the communists. It's about they were fighting for Mother Russia kind of story, you know. And all of these Russian films that have been made since the fall of communism all like show the soldiers still being fairly Christian, funnily enough, you know. They're Russian Orthodox dudes, you know.
yeah, I think I'm pretty sure Stalin let the Orthodox Church operate relatively freely, and I'm pretty sure, like, I mean, you had like a brief period under Khrushchev again where they tried to suppress the church, but like after that, the Orthodox Church was largely allowed, and people were allowed to be religious. But I don't know, like
And it never really
Soviet Union
died
kept
out
tabs on it.
amongst the older people, and it never really died out amongst a lot of the dudes in the
Peasantry,
countryside and this kind of stuff, you know.
Yeah, it's like I mean, to be fair, it's often I don't know who says it. I don't know if it's AA or someone like that who says often like the peasantry are the ones who keep the traditions burning alive the longest. So you can well imagine
True.
those are these Soviet
True.
villages where, I mean, yeah. So
That
even like we probably had
that
like little. Oh, sorry.
yeah, no, carry on. It's fine.
I was just
No,
going to say
Adam, what
we
were you
probably
saying?
had.
Man?
Well, I was just going to say that Orlando Feigs in that book, The People's Tragedy about the Russian Revolution, he makes a point along those lines, where he says
What
that
the
like
people
actually a lot
didn't
of
really give up on it.
well, when like a lot of the sort of you could say Bolshevik intellectuals would go out to these sort of peasant communities to try and educate them on the new system, they would actually a lot of times like brutally kill these people. But
Oh
and they were
yeah,
still
and of
quite
course we
pro-royalist,
have
even though they
to,
weren't.
Adam, and we have to, like, I think we have to admit these days that quite a lot of these Bolsheviks were of a certain ethnic persuasion, shall we say?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I'm not sure if the average Russian peasant would really like understood that because you know a lot of those communities were quite. Don't know if discombobulated was the right term, but they were quite. You know, they were really rural in the most
Yes.
extreme sense of the word. Although they maybe quite a few of them did still understand what it was they were dealing with, but a lot of the times they were like, "Oh, you know, you're against God, you're against the Tsar," like, and
Yeah.
even though they often still wouldn't necessarily side with like the White Army because it would sometimes represent like their local lords who maybe hadn't been quite nice to them in the latter days of the old Russian state. But yeah, and it's like you know, as Mitch was saying, like they like Stalin really took the boot back off the churches when he came in. I don't think it was immediately, but it was like.
Well, he kind of
early
had
on.
to in World War II. I mean, it's kind of like he reinstated.
Oh,
Why has he gone for you as well?
Yeah.
Oh.
But yeah,
Yeah, I can well imagine like you just got loads of these peasants who, if they're not allowed to have churches or just have like little crosses in like a little room or something like a little hut,
Mm,
where it's like all the Christian icons or whatever.
yeah.
Because
I heard that Putin still reopened or opened up like 3 times as many churches though. I don't know. Someone said that they were churches that were still closed down from, the early Bolsheviks, or I don't know if they were just new entities entirely or what.
well, yeah, I mean it's like I don't know. I was watching a film a while back called Ireland or stuff, and
Mm,
it's like and apparently it's a very potent religious film. Like it was so religious that like one of the crew members who filmed it actually joined a monastery. Like he
yeah.
was so persuaded by the film. So and it's not just that. I mean, of course, Russia doesn't have this anti-Christian culture like we do in
Mm,
the West. So there's nothing stopping a Russian, let's say, I don't know. I mean, I can't remember his name, but there's this oligarch in Russia who's just like very, like, yeah, even has like this website called Tsargrad, and it's just all about, re-Christianizing Russia, bringing Russian people back to their Christian roots, and so on.
yeah.
The fact that oligarchs like that can exist kind of tells you where the ball's rolling in Russia. Although, as Russians with attitude said, the Orthodox Church, for example, they're the only organization of it that oppose abortion.
Mm,
So there's not really on like important social issues, the Orthodox Church is the only traditional body, which means an issue like abortion. Most Russian people probably support abortion laws as they are now, where it's like 18 weeks or something, I believe.
yeah, but they're not the most. It's still not like the most religious country around. It's still a pretty secular people. But do they like? Are they one of these sorts of people where they go to church like out of habit, but they're
I
still
think it's
kind of
more. I mean, you get plenty of people who identify as Orthodox, but probably don't go to church because they see it as like their cultural heritage. It's
right?
like I think that's how it goes. I mean, I look at Russians and just like they don't. I mean, because Russia's very urbanized. I mean, that's one problem they've got is urban trends. Jenny tell you that people don't go to church if they live in a city, and most Russian people live in cities because of countryside. I don't know if it's like, well, I could be wrong with that because like the Russians have invested heavily in agriculture past 10 years, so you might be seeing more rural communities build up, more religiosity. I don't know.
Yeah, but I mean, you're someone with more Indo-European pagan sympathies. Do they have any movements like that in Russia? Anything of any
Yeah,
real
but like
size?
but it's like pitifully small, like 15,000 people in Russia that I know of.
Right.
Like, it's called Vodnovoy, and like the thing is, those circles are very nationalistic. Like some of
Mm,
them will have a certain happy windmill from a certain Austrian dictator, or they'll just be very I don't want to say conspiratorial, but they'll be very anti-Western, very anti 4x2. They'll be like there's not really any sort of lefty shit-lib pagans in Russia. All the pagans you'll get in Russia are very nationalistic. So I think there's a nationalist unit in Russia like Rusich. I believe
What
some
you're
of them are
saying,
pagan.
Mitch, what you're saying is they don't have a load of these lefty feminist Wiccans like we have in the West.
No, they don't have any of that crap. So I mean,
because
I know
I've got a lot of time for good pagans like Survive the Giant, for example, who we were talking about before the stream. Excellent historian dude. Who will tell you loads of stuff about the Vikings and the Anglo-Saxons and all this sort of thing. A lot of time for blokes like that. I don't have much time for these lefty Wiccans who try and pretend that somehow there were matriarchal societies and
well, I mean,
they weren't.
I didn't want to bring this up to like turn it into a this group, but I do find it kind of interesting that in a society that doesn't really have any sort of like anti-Christian propaganda, like top-down anti-Christian propaganda, like here where there is such a thing, you end up with this situation where you end up with a bunch of people that end up kind of rudderless, and they end up looking for something. And on the right, it's kind of more based paganism, or they kind of go into a sort of hardcore Christianity. But I think that's probably a bit of a smaller number. And then, of course, you get the lefty Wiccans on the other side. But everyone's looking for a god at the end of the day. Everyone's looking for something to look up to.
Much
Everyone's
truth.
trying to look for something
Yeah,
transcendental.
much truth. Adam and Mitch and I were talking about this before the stream, before you joined us. So much truth in that. I mean, look, there is this friction between some pagans and some Christians, particularly some tradcaths. And I like some tradcaths. Let me be honest about this. I was,
and so on, yeah.
Yeah, Dave the Distributist, I think he's a great guy. He's a really good man. He's also a husband and a father and all this stuff that we want our people to be. And he's an engineer of some description, so he's got a proper job. But the point I would make is that we have so many enemies. When I say we, I mean us on the right. We have so many enemies that this, like, arguing between some pagans and some Christians is just pointless at the moment. It really is. It's pointless. We need allies, not enemies. Given we don't have hands on any levers of power at the moment, I think we need to, like, say, all right, well, we have some differences on religion and what have you, but we'll deal with them later on. All right.
Yeah, it's like it's quite retarded there. On one hand, you get the Varg types who think we can just step over 1,000 years of Christianity and just pretend it never happened. So there's that.
But we're all cultural Christians. I mean, look, I'm an agnostic, okay? So in some ways, I'm in a good position because I can see the pros and cons of both sides. But I was baptized as Church of England. My son was baptized as Church of England by me. I got him to have that done. And we're all cultural Christians. We can't change that. You can't get rid of over 1,000 years of history at all. Or nearly 2,000 years of history, actually. But
Well, I mean, I've already said, like, by 800 AD we were fully Christianized, because I mean, even like 700 AD there was still sources of like pagans still resisting the Christianization. So it's about 1,200 years, if I had to be honest.
Yeah. But I mean, I'm a huge fan of Alfred the Great. And Alfred the Great was he's the only king of England or Britain who's ever been called the Great. And he was, because he was the only one who ever defeated the Norse, the Vikings.
And he's a saint in Russian Orthodoxy.
Yeah, there you go. So, I mean, exactly. I just think, I think we need allies, not enemies at this stage. And like I say, I think people like Dave the Distributist and Survive the Jive, for example, they should easily be able to cooperate on about, I don't know, 90% of things.
Well, it's like you have, on one hand, the Christians are also pretty as bad as the pagans in that they just love to spit on the pagan traditions. They love to call worshipping gods like Woden and Funor as being like borderline satanic, and call for just such things to just be suppressed. So it's like both sides are as bad as each other in terms of how argumentative and confrontational they are to one another.
Yeah. That's absolutely true. Like, one of the things that always irritates me is when Christians, I mean, I consider myself a Christian. I'm Anglican. I mean, that's probably the gayest of all the churches, but I've never moved, because for me, a large part of faith is also about community, and I live in an Anglican community, so I'm an Anglican. That's just the way it is. But at the same time, like, there's this thing that especially a lot of the Christians say, of all denominations, where they'll say that, like, well, Christianity made Europe into what it was. And like, if you look at the history, like looking at like pre-Christian Europe does kind of put me off paganism, but at the same time, like, pre-Christian Europe still had not only great civilizations, but the basis of its great future. So the idea that it's like Christianity can definitely hone a people into something a little bit sharper than what they were. but it's not the be all and end all, you know. And it's hard to square that circle to accept that that you can have a shared faith, like this idea of like Christian nationalism. You can have this shared faith between people, but it doesn't, like, race still ends up kind of floating to the top. Ethnicity also floats to the top.
Adam and Mitch said something to me before you joined us that I think is worth pointing out, is that if you look at somebody like Tolkien, for example, who was absolutely an English and British nationalist, I think you could describe. He fought in World War One on the Battle of the Somme.
Yeah.
But he was able, as Mitch pointed out, this is not my idea, this is Mitch, he was able to reconcile Catholicism with a lot of traditional paganism as well. And I think that's the sort of thing that we should look at. I mean, you know, as I say, Tolkien himself was absolutely a devout Christian and a devout Catholic, but he was able to, in his books, he was able to synthesize that stuff together with a lot of pagan beliefs and so on. And I think that's the kind of thing we should be looking at, but I don't know what you do to think about
that. Yeah, I mean, the thing is as well, I think it's hard because a lot of those people, I mean, like, I always find this kind of funny. If you look at Lord of the Rings, right, the books and the films are basically 50 years apart, and yet the people that they speak to are so vastly different. I always think of this one part in where it like this one part in the books versus the films where Aragorn goes to Rivendell and the sword is in pieces on the plinth and he won't take it, and they reforge it and bring it to him in the third film, whereas in the book he has it in his bag and he literally like wields it in a pub and he's like, I'm, you know, whoever. And you know, and it's sort of that, I mean, that really kind of puts brings home like how much sort of the European, or specifically the Englishman's, view of himself as like just falling in on itself, you know, just over half a century. But yeah, I mean, he's someone that seems to tread quite a fine line between this sort of morphosizing these pagan and Christian traditions together into, I mean, he has obviously the benefit of it being a fantasy world, and he can kind of shape it how he likes. Whereas for us, it's kind of not so easy. I mean, I always try to characterize.
I was just going to say, Tolkien was also steeped in, like, not only Anglo-Saxon English history, but also in Germanic and Scandinavian history as well. But he was also steeped in the classical tradition of like ancient Greece and ancient Rome, and his books kind of bring all those things together, to me anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think that he was probably actually more sympathetic to paganism, to you know, to European paganism than his roots and upbringing would probably ever allow him to perceive himself as. But because, you know, a lot of his scholarly work, if you go and look at it, is looking at pre-Christian English and Northwestern European
he did big stuff on Beowulf, etc.
Yeah.
I'll just intercede. So Beowulf, Tolkien's overall idea with Beowulf, it was written at a time when we just converted to Christianity, but the paganism was still in popular memory, probably like a couple of generations after. So that's why Beowulf has so many pagan themes, even though it was written at a time when we just converted to Christianity.
And didn't Tolkien also do stuff on The Wanderer, the poem about the dude who lost his lord?
He probably did, but I don't have a book on hand.
He based certain themes from like the Rohirrim specifically on there's a tome, isn't there, that a lot of those were, including the Wanderer, were put into.
Yeah, where you're Fed and he's lamenting, like you're saying, where horse and the rider. And I mean, that's literally, I believe that's how the Wanderer poem starts. Like, he's just lamenting the fact that he's now a wanderer. He's striding all over the countryside. He's got no purpose in life. His lord is dead. All his mates are probably scattered or killed off, and he's left to. Because you also got to think Anglo-Saxon warriors, they had a strong sense of honor and loyalty, but they also had a sense of
100%.
dying.
Yeah.
Also that dying in battle was best fate for a man to have.
And also, just to tie this into our discussion earlier about Ukraine and Russia and all the rest of it, of course, the thing is that the Hungarian Guard, which originally started off as this Scandinavian Guard in Byzantium, i.e. Eastern Rome, these guys called themselves the Romans right up until the Middle Ages, when the Turks eventually overran them. Even though they spoke Greek, they called themselves the Romans. And they were the Eastern Roman Empire. They absolutely were. The Hungarian Guard, eventually after 1066, became mainly an Anglo-Saxon Guard. So, you know. And I believe you, Mitch, you pointed out to us some stuff where they had colonies in Crimea and stuff like this, you know, of Anglo-Saxons.
Yeah, right. Because the thing was, that land was slipping away from Eastern Roman control, and I think like the only other people who settled on that land were like Turkic pagan nomads or something like that, like the Cumans probably or something, who the Byzantines weren't particularly fond of. So from a Byzantine point of view, it was just a good deal. You give Anglo-Saxons a load of land, you've got 10,000 good warriors at least, who have got a strong sense of honor and loyalty.
Yep.
And you know, so I think it was a Battle of Beroia. It was called. I don't know where Beroia is on a map. Probably Bulgaria, if I had to guess. Where 500 Anglo-Saxon Varangians with their Great Dane axes just tore open like this Wagenburg, the Pecheneg tribe, built up for themselves, and with the use of these Dane axes, they just killed off huge amounts of these steppe nomad horse archers in like quick as a flick. So that's why the Byzantines were so fond of the Anglo-Saxons at that time.
Yeah, and of course they were using these Dane axes at the Battle of Hastings in 1066, for example. And when the Norman horse rode up to these dudes, they weren't getting anywhere. Like they were getting killed. The only reason the Normans won at Hastings in 1066 was because they feigned a retreat, and not the housecarls, not the regular professional soldiers of Harold, but his freed, his militia, basically.
His feudmen.
Yes, Fiat, but beg pardon, Mitch, you pronounce these things much better than me. But,
yeah, sorry. It's a bit of a weird pronunciation.
They chased the Normans and basically lost their position up on the hill.
Yeah, it's quite weird how the Normans suffered heavy casualties, but all that matters was they won, and it's not just that they won; they also killed off most of the Anglo-Saxon leadership in one battle as well.
Yeah, all the household warriors of Harold died with him because of this sense of loyalty which you were talking about. None of them ran away; they all stood there until they were killed, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I'll make sure I don't activate my Anglo-Saxon autism about this because I don't know. Because I mean,
it always annoys me when I hear people talking about eternal Anglos. I always think of Harold's housecarls. Yeah, they were not eternal Anglos, babes.
The thing is, I mean, I don't know. Like, I would generally say we did lose something about ourselves when the Normans won. Like that strong Germanic sense of loyalty and honor. We kind of lost it after the Normans won.
I don't think we did.
I
don't think we did, Mitch. I don't think we lost it. I think it got weaker, but I don't think we lost it. I think, like, if you look at the British in later times, like in the 100 Years' War, for example, against France, or even like the Spanish Armada, and even going into the 18th century with the British infantry of Marlborough, and then later on Wellington and what have you, I don't think we lost it. I just think it got a bit weaker, maybe.
Well, that's the thing. Is like, I mean, this is also where my pagan stuff is coming into play because, so even when we were Christian as an Anglo-Saxon society, we still have this sense of, well, dying in battle in service of a greater purpose, like serving your Lord, was the best way to die. But you take, let's say, I don't know, let's say you take a redcoat serving in 1800. He's not going to think the same way as Anglo-Saxon does in terms of like thinking that he's going to die and
very
fight
seldom
for his
ran
Lord.
away. Mitch, listen, this is like an era I'm into, and not only with the Redcoats, but also with the Royal Navy sailors. You know what? Those guys would fight to the end. That's why they didn't lose very often. They didn't.
Yeah, but it's more because of its like iron discipline that we bred into our forces, which of course is a great thing, but it's like it's not the same culture.
I think it was more than that,
Mitch.
Mitch. I think it was more than that. I think there was also this idea of loyalty, and I think it went right up, certainly to World War One. You know,
and I'm not saying
some of the battles in World War One where ordinary soldiers who had not the best of upbringings in many cases and didn't have a great life in many cases, but they fought till the end. And I mean, you know, we were talking. I don't remember which one it was, but a few shows ago we were talking about Storm of Steel by the German dude, and who mainly ended up fighting the Brits through most of World War One, and he has nothing but good stuff to say about the Brits in World War One. You know?
Yeah, but he really hates the French in that book, and I don't really blame him, to be honest. When you figure
yeah, no, he does. That's my point. Is he didn't like the French at all, but he mostly ended up fighting the Brits. And Ernst Junger, as Bolero says in the chat, and and Ernst Junger doesn't have a bad word to say about the Brits. Really.
Yeah, because I mean, he said like we were chivalrous, but we also fought hard. Like we didn't like the only time the British. He said like words along the effects of the British only ran away when ordered to. Like they would stand to the death if required.
Yeah.
Even in the face of overwhelming odds from German stormtroopers or whatever. So I believe it was something like she had the I don't know what the other Germans call it. They call it various names, but the Ludendorff offensive or Spring offensive, whatever you call it. I know Ludendorff
the huge
was
Kaiser battles in the early 1980s. Yeah.
Well, they called it the Kaiser battles because Ludendorff wanted to escape a blame for how badly it turned out. So I always called it.
But it was called the Kaiser Slot or something like that. But,
yeah.
And they took a lot of land. They took a lot of ground temporarily, but they didn't succeed in pushing the Brits away from the French, and they didn't succeed in pushing the Brits, and of course the Canadians and Australians who were fighting with them. They didn't succeed in pushing them back towards their main supply ports. It was a failure because of that.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. Like, I mean, I think Ernst Jung even wrote at one point, like, because the thing was, the German food situation by 1918 was dire, and so by the time he reached our trenches and took them over, he actually got delayed, unexpectedly delayed, because the troops were just starving. They come across our food stores, and
they couldn't believe the supplies that they sometimes captured. Yeah, I've heard that too.
Yeah. I mean, there's a German nationalist now who says the same. Like, he says, yeah, that's actually quite true. But the fact is, because I mean, I think like, it was something like the thing about the Germans is that while I like them, they are, in a strategic sense, they are retarded in that they just make really bad long-term decisions. Well, yeah, it's like there's this in 1916, right? So the Germans have a bright idea of killing off all their pigs. However, that meant that there was this Paris, because I mean, I can't remember. It's like they use pig feed, like not pig feed, and we use pig crap as fertilizer. So all the pigs getting killed off, there was no more fertilizer for the sake of their harvests, and so they had to just. So the only crop that was able to grow after that point was turnips. So the German soldiers had to eat bleed turnip bread for months and months until the Kaiserschlacht, as it was called, where they were able to get sausages and eggs from our camp. So
yeah, and also they couldn't believe they found like hundreds and thousands of tins of bully beef and all this kind of stuff. Yeah, for sure. Adam, I seem to recall, like before Christmas, you were going to read Storm of Steel. Did you get around to doing it yet? You've probably been too busy, I suspect.
No, it's sat on my bedside table. It's like not the next book I'm reading, but the book after that.
It's actually good, and you read
Yeah,
this
yeah.
book, and I mean, because really, honestly, this dude does not have a single bad word to say about the Brits. He doesn't. He thinks they were the best soldiers, apart from the Germans, of course, because he was a German. So, fair enough. But yeah, he doesn't have a bad word to say about the Brits.
Yeah, there's a few bits that really stand out, like when he meets that officer, that British officer who's wounded,
Hmm.
and they like have a cigarette together while the guy's like formally surrendering.
Hmm.
But then there's also that other instance where they get attacked by, I think it's a unit of Highlanders, and he describes like looking up and seeing this like 6 foot tall, like uber mensch stormtrooper just like lobbing grenades down into the trench. But yeah, and there's some other good bits in there as well, like when he's going back and he's like looking at the autumn trees, and he's like I don't regret fighting or potentially even dying for this country, and it's I can see why certain people jumped on it in the post-war years to sort of
I
tell a
like
political
Younger, I
message.
really do. And of course,
Mm.
the thing was, like, when Hitler came to power, he wanted to make Younger into a big hero. And Younger was ambivalent about the German National Socialists.
Mm.
He was ambivalent about them, I think is the best way to describe it. Like, he was
Yeah.
never a full-on supporter.
Yeah, well, you saw that with a lot of people back then.
Partly,
There
of
was a lot
course,
of
partly because he was a royalist. He liked the Kaiser.
Yeah, well, you saw that a lot in the the Weimar years. There was a lot of people that kind of like tacitly sided with the National Socialists because it was an alternative to what the hell was going on at the time, but they always kind of would rather have had something better. That there's also, I mean, Jung is a really interesting character generally. Some of his other books are really quite good. He was a
Yes.
he was a clever guy, and he wrote some pretty good sort of political philosophy prose of his own. There's a book he has, I forget the name of it. It's kind of like I suppose you could say his own version of 1984.
I think Junger is somebody who deserves a bit more recognition on the right, to be honest with you.
Yeah, he's got quite an interesting career as well, because he does some kind of unusual things like towards the closing of the war.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think he does deserve a bit more recognition on the right. And as I say, Storm of Steel is a if you want a really good war book, Storm of Steel, I would find it hard to find a better one to recommend to you, to be honest.
Mm.
Especially, it's funny because like you can read some of like Diary of a Fox Hunting Man and this kind of stuff by some of the British officers. And Junger doesn't have any of that because he was a professional officer, for one thing. He doesn't have any of that. But he also is not like, Germany über alles. He's not really that way either. He's kind of like, I want my country to win this war, which I think is what most people were like who fought in World War One, and even to a large degree in World War Two, to be honest with you.
Well, it's like I remember reading somewhere that the Northern Saxons of Germany, they were lamenting the fact that they had to fight us because they saw us as brothers, given what we had, given we are Anglo-Saxons after all. The Bavarians.
Mate, in 1914, there were German and British regiments with the same battle honours on their colours who fought each other. Because the Germans were traditional British allies,
Yeah, I mean, you have the Bavarians who they weren't so close to the English, but they weren't exactly fond of fighting either. They just wanted to go back home and drink beer at Oktoberfest instead. And then you had the Prussians. Then you have the Prussians who were, I can't remember what the guy in the film said, like about Peter Jackson, but he said the Prussians were real bastards. Like they just loved killing. They loved their jobs of being soldiers. No mercy
Even that,
whatsoever.
but even that's a generalization, Mitch. I mean, I'm sure there were many
Well,
Russians who didn't really want to do that, but whatever.
Well, I mean, there is that strong sense of Prussian military culture where it's all like, oh yeah, and so you also had they have like a strong loyalty to the Kaiser, and of course the Kaiser in most times wasn't particularly too fond of us. It still blamed us as gimpy armed, So there's that.
Look, but I mean, the Kaiser was okay until he got rid of Bismarck.
And well, that was like what 2 years into his reign. So that's like most of his reign. He was just a complete crackhead.
Yeah, once he got rid of Bismarck, the German diplomacy went wrong. Everything went wrong. I still sometimes look back on this era and I think if only they'd kept Bismarck, Britain and Germany had ended up as allies. And then I don't see how World War One would have broken out, for one thing. I just don't.
Well, there's an old German saying where it goes, there's no war that a German soldier can't win, but there's no war that a German diplomat can't lose.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah,
fair enough.
Well, it's true, though. I mean, when you look at German diplomacy or overall German strategies, they've always got a retarded way.
Apart from under Bismarck, when German diplomacy was really high grade.
Yeah. I mean, that's one period of German diplomacy that actually was good. But other than that, the Germans, they are just like really stupid when it comes to strategic planning overall for wars.
I just look back in the 1890s and I think, just imagine if Joseph Chamberlain, when he was foreign secretary, had been able to do what he wanted to do, which was to make a German-British alliance. A German-British alliance, like in the early 20th century, would have made World War One pretty much impossible, I think.
Well, I mean,
might have saved European culture.
Well, I'm not sure, but I just think, let's say Joseph Chamberlain got into power. I mean, I don't know. But I mean, do you think he wouldn't get gotten subverted by lots of Churchill and Edward Grey?
No.
Or whatever.
No. Adam, what's your view on this, mate? I respect your views on history.
Well, really you shouldn't, because my historical knowledge is probably my worst section. But
I just think an Anglo-German alliance in like 1900-ish would have been like, there's no way you're going to get World War One. It's not going to happen.
I mean, I think we did a lot to shoot that.
Because who's going to start it? The French? Well, the French aren't going to beat the German army and the Royal Navy. The Russians? Well, they're not going to beat the German army and the Royal Navy. So how does it start? I don't think.
Yeah, it's hard to get in the heads of British statesmen in that period, but they had some pretty weird ideas where they were basically
the liberal ones. Yeah.
Well, yeah, because like they were siding with this sort of leftist republic, which was France, over other similar European powers, similar to ourselves.
And
you go and look at
and also they were siding Adam with the Ruski Tsars, who were probably the most absolutist rulers still left in Europe at the same time as these lefty French republicans.
Yeah, I think our foreign policy on Russia has always been arse about face, but like at every single moment as well. But if you go and read that, like that Patrick, I mean, I know you've read it anyway, that Patrick Buchanan book, Churchill, Hitler and the Unnecessary War. There's a section in that where he's talking about, quite near the beginning, where he's talking about the dealings of like German statesmen with British ones prior to World War One. And how they would talk about like the Germans wanted to get a few colonies of their own, and they were basically
they had some,
but a few more, and they were basically very aggressively shot down by us, even though they were looking for something that would be mutually beneficial between the two of us.
I don't know. Look, to me, as you well know, the last good British Prime Minister was Lord Salisbury.
But even Salisbury
up until 1902, he was the last one. We haven't had a good one since. as far
Yeah,
as
but
I'm
even Salisbury was quite aggressively against any German expansion in places like Africa.
Oh yeah, he was. I mean, he's on the other hand. Let me think. What did he do? What he did was he gave Germany back Heligoland, which is a little island
Or yeah,
in the
yeah,
North
it's like that
Sea,
island off.
and we got Zanzibar in Africa in recompense, which of course in the First World War was stupid, but if there hadn't been a First World War, it was quite sensible.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that little island when you've just got a naval invasion off the Germans from the get go, or do you reckon he would just have been shot down straight away? Well, because I mean, it's so close to a German heartland, and unless we had like an airfield there with a fully developed air force by that point, I don't see what
No,
point that island would have
1914, mate, in 1914 there was no such thing as an air force, but
Well, I'm just saying hypothetically, if there was an air force in 1914
yeah.
with an air base at that Heligoland base,
There were aircraft in 1914, but they were basically for reconnaissance. They couldn't do anything. I mean, you could drop half a dozen grenades or something, but that wasn't going to change anything. But yeah, I mean, in 1914, Britain giving away Heligoland was foolish, but in when Salisbury did it, it made sense. You know? But
Yeah.
like I said, what I would have liked to have seen was an Anglo-German alliance around 1900. And then I don't think there's any chance World War One would ever have broken out. I don't think it could have.
Yeah, so I find it funny how you and Godfrey Bloom exactly have the same views. It's like you're oceans apart from one another, but like you just like I know like you agree with so much. Because I mean, all I've been doing, one thing I've been doing over Christmas holiday was just like listen to Godfrey Bloom on Millennial, where because I mean he'll say the same thing as you about the last decent government we had was Lord Salisbury. That was the last decent conservative government.
Which it was,
yeah.
So pro-British government whose every decision was pro-British and anti-everyone else, as far as they could work it out. But yeah, I Godfrey. I don't mind Godfrey Bloom. I think he's a pretty good dude in most respects. But yeah, if there'd been an Anglo-German alliance in 1900, there would not have been a World War One. Wouldn't have happened because Britain and Germany would have spoken about this stuff, even if everything else had gone off as it did. So the Serbians killed this Austrian prince and his missus, right? Even if all this happens, we would have spoken to each other and said, no, this is not a cause for a big war.
Well, I mean, Kaiser Wilhelm was communicating a lot to Tsar Nikolai about it, and it's like, I mean, I do think
the Kaiser didn't want World War One. Absolutely, he didn't. He wasn't. I mean, he wasn't the brightest tool in the shed by any means, but he wasn't a complete idiot, and he really didn't want World War One.
Yeah, I do think.
But also, Bolero is right in the chat. He's a huge error that I mean, and he made many, from the Kruger telegram onwards, was to build a navy. And the thing was, the German navy was a luxury. They didn't need it. They had the biggest, most powerful army in the world, and they couldn't get anywhere unless Britain collapsed, because Britain was like a barrier between the German navy and the rest of the world, right? So they could never get anywhere with that navy.
Well, it's not just that. I mean,
Tirpitz was a moron. He was an idiot.
Well, I mean, you look at the German coastline; it's very just closed off. Like you have a Baltic Sea coast, which is all right for going against the Russians, but the North Sea coast of Germany is just small compared to ours.
Yep.
And it's not just that we've got a naval tradition going back to
Britain is like a barrier into the Atlantic for the German navy. And so, like Tirpitz and the Kaiser decided, I'm going to build the second biggest navy in the world. And of course, by 1911 or 1912, even the Germans had admitted they'd lost the dreadnought building race. They just couldn't keep up with the Brits because we had so many more shipbuilders than they did back then.
Well, it's not just that. I mean, what good is having a navy though when you don't have a tradition like we do? Because we've had a naval tradition going back to Battle of Sluis.
Well, there's that. There definitely is that, Mitch. But it's also like the British Royal Navy was just so much bigger than the German Navy that you'll get idiots even today talking about the Battle of Jutland in 1916 and say, "Oh yeah, 3 British battle cruisers blew up." Yeah, well, yeah, they did, and the reason they did is because the battle cruiser fleet removed most of the safety features from their ships, including flash doors and all sorts of other stuff, in order to fire faster. Right? This has been known for years by all naval historians. Right? This was Beattie's fault. Beattie was a shit admiral, absolutely a shit admiral, and yeah, but for those 3 ships, then Jutland, in terms of warships sunk, would have been a minor British victory. But the German Navy, even the ships who weren't, there were loads of other German ships which were really heavily damaged. And the day after Jutland, the Royal Navy could have gone to sea, the Grand Fleet could have gone to sea again and absolutely fought another battle of Jutland. The German Navy couldn't have done it for like 7 to 8 months.
Well, you have a Kiel mutiny back in. We have a Kiel mutiny, which kick-started off the Kaiser's abdication because the fleet, the high sea fleet, was ordered to go out.
True.
I may basically told them to go whistle. So that then
and part of that was due to the fact that the German Navy was too scared to come out again, because after Jutland, they didn't come out again in full force.
Well, I always interpret it as a battle of attrition. Well, at the end of the day, we can afford to lose like 10 battle cruisers. The Germans can't. That's what I always interpreted it as.
Yeah, absolutely right. If the Brits lose 10 battle cruisers, well, that's really bad, and we've lost, 8,000 men. But the Germans don't have 10 battle cruisers, they just don't. So, yeah. But, I mean, the German fleet, there's a quite well-known book called The Luxury Fleet. And I don't totally agree with all of it. I can't remember the author's name now. But basically, it's true in the sense that the German Navy was never going to get enough money to come near to the Royal Navy because the German Army was the most important thing, whereas the British Army was a minor thing for Britain. It's a whale and an elephant thing. In Britain, the Royal Navy was, and still should be, the most important armed service, whereas in Germany it was the army, because Germany's a continental power and Britain's an island power, which back then was like a worldwide empire as well, which also needed a navy.
Yeah, it's kind of retarded. Kaiser Wilhelm, on one hand, he just, by antagonizing the Russians, he got the French and Russians together in an alliance. But then also he decides to waste a lot of money, which could be better spent on the army or...
Yeah,
I don't know.
100.
The
German Navy achieved nothing in World War I. Nothing whatsoever useful to Germany.
Well, at best, we provided a nuisance, like the Battle of the Falkland Islands, I believe, where... Well, that was actually one we won. I can't remember a battle before that where Graf von Spee, that particular admiral, caused a nuisance towards us. But nothing more than a nuisance, really, because he could start sunk at the end of the day in short order. So I don't see how the German Navy could have done anything materially useful.
This was like utterly destroyed by HMS Rodney and King George V. So, big deal.
Yeah. So I
don't know. It's and Michael, this dude, Michael K, 19th century fan, UBEC campaign helped draw the US into the war, and it did in both World War I and World War II. Although maybe it was used as an excuse by some people, but yeah, but it did for sure. I also believe what Bolero said here. Pat Buchanan, the guy who wrote The Unnecessary War, great book. Everyone should read it. But yeah, not wrong.
But of course, like the thing with that as well, like you're talking about, like earlier about like German statesmen. I mean, it's kind of funny, isn't it, that the quality of German higher command and German foreign policy could be so bad at times when, you know, like the officers in the German army were some of the most exceptionally trained in the world. You know, the standards to even pass an officer school were very strict.
For sure.
So they had this enormous concentration within the army of talent, and then it just didn't seem to sift upwards or outwards. It's kind of unusual.
Also, I tell you, there's a thing, and that I think there's some truth, is that the German army was trained to the operational level, which is in between.
The Germans got that
strategy.
The Germans got that word.
They were very heavily operational level, but that is like, it's higher than tactics, which is, you know, what you do if your battalion is attacking somebody, but it's much lower than overall world strategy. And that was the thing the Germans always concentrated on, was operational level stuff. And I think that hurt them in World War II and in World War I.
Funny thing is, to an extent, if you look at the German economy, it's still actually kind of run that way.
It doesn't surprise me.
So maybe that's sort of a more cultural thing with Germans more broadly. I don't know, but yeah. So I don't know. I kind of think that I mean, the more I look at it, I mean, like World War II always, as a slightly different example, always seemed like totally inevitable, and I kind of think to an extent World War I kind of was as well. You know, you have to change so much other stuff.
Adam, except for an Anglo-German alliance, the World War I wasn't inevitable at all if you had an Anglo-German alliance.
Right, but I mean, World War I still probably would have happened. I mean, the outcome might have been slightly better for us if we'd done that. But
I don't think it would have. How do you think that would have happened if like the major people were Britain and Germany, like the Kaiser's Germany, if they were aligned? Well, how does Russia or France or even Austro-Hungary start a war? I'm not quite sure how.
I mean, Germany seemed quite surprised that we even entered the war.
Yeah, they did. They didn't think we would.
They were prepared. I mean, their entire military doctrine seemed to be that they were prepared to actually fight Russia and France together.
Yeah, but not Britain. They didn't want to fight Britain.
No.
Well, I mean, the thing was the Schlieffen Plan said that if the Germans had to go to war before 1917, otherwise Russia would be too strong. Because Russia at that time was still relatively backward in terms of railways and so on. But once the French built railways enough in Western Russia, the mobilization the Tsar could bring to the fight would be too much for Germany to bear, for their invasion of France to be a quicker, and then because that's the original Schlieffen Plan was push to Paris, humiliate the French, peace out, and then focus all your strength on Russia. And because the Russians, generally there's a trend in wars for Russia where always at the first war, like the first year or the first phase of a war, the Russians do poorly at. So hoping that the Germans could shock the Russians through, like, you know, once they've taken over France or like pushed them out, they just repivot to Russia.
Mitch, the idea, as far as I can work out of it, of the Schlieffen Plan was you beat France quickly and you only leave a little few forces in Eastern Germany to slow the Russians down. But you knock out France really quick, and then all those troops who've just knocked out France can be sent east and beat the Russians. I think that's
what did they say? The rightmost battalion has to brush the... He said, like, what was the quote? The rightmost battalion has to brush the channel with its sleeve.
That's right. The rightmost battalion of that thing needs to have his sleeve in the water of the English Channel. Yeah.
Yeah, the thing was, however, the plan didn't take into account because I'm pretty sure the Russians that invaded East Prussia, and I can't remember the German commander's name, but he was above Hindenburg at the time. He decided to go against the Russians in a full-ground battle at Gumbinnen, and the Germans just got their asses kicked. So that kind of
they didn't win. Yeah, that's absolutely true. They didn't win. You're right.
So the Schlieffen plan,
and of course, in the West, the Germans. Some people will tell you the Germans won the Battle of Mons against the BEF because the BEF had to retreat a day afterwards. But all the German sources I've read say, my battalion lost so many men. This is ridiculous against the Brits, who we thought were like absolutely useless. But the little tiny British army, and it was small, although to be fair, the BEF in 1914 was almost twice as big as the modern British army. But the tiny little BEF in 1914 was really, really good. Like the Germans thought the British battalions had loads of machine guns, when in fact they only had 2 per battalion. But what it was they were trained to fire their Lee Enfield rifles at like over 15 rounds a minute.
But the other thing as well, if you sort of sidestep this whole debate around the big powers, at the end of the day, Germany had to step in and assist Austro-Hungary, because if it hadn't, it would have lost bigger battles in the long run, because it would have then had as its ally this much more weakened state than it already was, with these various either ethnic groups chomping at it from the inside, or Russia-backed ethnic enclaves chomping at it from the hills.
But Adam, let's be fair. Had Britain and Germany had an alliance, right? Instead of Germany and Austro-Hungary being the central dudes, right, who roped in Turkey and Bulgaria, it would have been Britain and Germany. And Britain and Germany would have been much more important than Austro-Hungary. And I think under those circumstances, the Germans could have turned around and said to Austro-Hungary, well, you know what, it's a shame that they killed your prince, but now we're not going to start a great European war over it,
But the problem for them is that, like, Austro-Hungary is never a good ally, and there's nothing against the Austro-Hungarians. It was because they were like the last absolute monarchy around. Their war fighting capability was low, which I think is a positive for monarchies, right? But all that aside, it was never that the Austro-Hungarians were an important ally. It was more about their geographic position relative to Germany.
I still think if the major alliance in 1914 had not been Germany, Austro-Hungary, and Britain, France, and Russia, but instead had been Germany and Britain, that war wouldn't have started. It just wouldn't have. The Brits and the Germans would have said to the Austrians, look, you're going to have to swallow this, boys. You're just going to have to. Sorry.
I don't know. I still don't see how.
Or they might have been able to reduce the war to a little Austrian campaign against the Serbs.
Yeah, but the Russians would have gone to war against the Austro-Hungarians, and let's face it, the Austro-Hungarians. I mean, this
is the thing, Mitch. I don't think they would have, because Russia knew that if they went to war against the Austrians, and thus the Germans came in, that meant the French came in, and that meant the British came in, right? Because of the Entente Cordiale. I don't think that would have happened if Britain and Germany had been allies, because then you would have looked at the Russians would have thought, right. So if we go to war to support Serbia in this war, the French will come in but the British are allies of the Germans. That means France is going to lose. Just does, always.
See, the only
Well-
way I can actually see this strategy of yours panning out is if we look at, ironically, Japan.
Mhm.
Would the Japanese be willing to step into the war on our side in the
But they
same
were
if
all-
we
but adamant,
to help us
yeah.
proxy to Germany in the same way that they would help us against the Central Powers originally?
Adamant, Japan in 1914 were absolutely loyal British allies.
So would they
So-
chomp at the bit to get a taste of Russia?
Well, of course. So
On
why
our
is Russia
behalf.
Yeah, of course they would, because Britain and Japan had been allies since 1902, and they were allies until 1922. Right? I've done a stream on this with I did one with what's his name, with August. I think I've done one that touched on it with Apostolic Majesty. Japan were totally loyal British allies because we built most of their navy, you know. And so you if you're Russia, you're going to say, all right, Germany doesn't really want Austria to make this into a huge war. But if they do, all right, France might be our allies, but Britain and Japan are both going to attack us, and we're not going to win that. No way. You know?
But doesn't that kind of make World War One more likely? It just puts Germany on better terms.
No, I think it makes it very, very unlikely because the Kaiser didn't want a world war.
No.
You know, even the Kaiser, who was not the brightest tool in the shed, did not want World War One.
But he's still got to worry about he's still got to worry about Russian backed ethnic interests in the Balkans, which Austro-Hungary was essentially Germany's gateway to.
Kind of.
Or I should say Germany's gateway to, probably more like Germany's gateway from.
You all right? Here's another thing, and that comes from this. If Britain is an ally of Germany in like 1900, 1914, okay, and of course Japan is an ally of Britain, yeah, and Turkey was a traditional ally of Britain because Turkey had always been protected by the British, not because they thought Turkey was a good place, but merely because it stopped the Russians getting hold of it. Yeah. That means Turkey's also on our side, not on the Russian side. How does World War One start in those circumstances? I just don't get it. There ain't no way that Austria-Hungary and Russia are going to start World War II when both of them know they can't win.
But does Russia realize it can win from that position? That's kind of the other issue, because it's still kind of based on this idea that Germany has to have some guarantee that we'll come in and back them up in what would be a massively catastrophic war. And now, looking back at it, we know that we actually would, because we went in on the other side and backed them up when there was no fucking need for us to.
Yeah.
But they didn't know that at the time.
We could do it navally, Adam. In terms of Britain in 1914, Britain could have adopted its traditional naval strategy because the Royal Navy was bigger than the next two navies put together, right? And we could do that. And of course, also the other thing is Germany doesn't have to build this big fleet if Britain and Germany are allies. They don't need to, all right? But the point is the British fleet and whatever the Germans have and the Japanese fleet is easily vastly more powerful than anything Russia or France can come out with. And how does this war start? I just don't see how it starts, because Austro-Hungary only started the war with Russia, or Serbia and then Russia, because they knew Russia was going to back them. And if Russia backed them, they only started this war because Germany was going to back them. Yeah, wouldn't have happened otherwise. And if Germany just turns around and says, no, Britain's our major ally, and we're not going to support you in this war. Austro-Hungary ain't even going to do it. They're just not.
Yeah, but the problem is there you've got this sort of political stalemate situation where if the Russians don't think the Germans will back them, then the Russians are definitely going to back their Balkan allies.
No, the Russians always back the Balkan allies. But the point is, what made Russia in 1914 go to war against the Austro-Hungarians, even knowing it might bring in Germany, was the fact that the France would back them. And if France backed them, then Britain would. Right? So if only France is going to back them, and let me tell you, mate, honestly, this is the truth. Without Britain in 1914, France would have been far more reluctant to go to war with Germany than they were. And so if you have an Anglo-German alliance, World War I makes no sense. It makes no sense whatsoever, to be honest. So you won't end up with... I don't think Russia's going to go to war to support Serbia. I don't think Austria is going to go to war with Serbia. I think they'll both get told no, and you don't get World War I.
Yeah, I'm still not sure, but maybe not.
But that's only my own view. But I don't think it happens. I think Britain's disaster. If I'd have been like the British leader in the 1900 to 1940, I would have been like Lord Salisbury. I would have gone Splendid Isolation, which is what these streams are called. And I would have said, yeah, Japan is our ally, but only if two countries start a fight. And we don't have any more, and I wouldn't have had any more. But if I'd have been Joseph Chamberlain and been able to make an Anglo-German alliance, there's no World War I. It just don't happen. Because Germany's got easily the most powerful and biggest army in Europe, and Britain has easily and no problem got the biggest navy in Europe. As the Kaiser once said when he was musing about these things, if Britain and Germany were allies, no one could move anywhere. Because you got the biggest, best army in the world and the biggest, best navy in the world are allied. Who's going to do anything against those people? Nobody.
Yeah.
Nobody was strong enough to do anything against Britain and Germany if they were allied. Certainly not Russia, certainly not France, certainly not Austro-Hungary. They could not have moved, any of them. The idea that they could have fought a little local war, sure, but anything that Germany and Britain didn't want them to do, couldn't have done it, because they just would have lost. But to me, that would have been the way to go. Anglo-German alliance circa 1900. Fuck the French and fuck the Russians, to be honest. Don't care. And the Austro-Hungarians. Don't care about any of them. But most of Europe's young men would not have got killed for no purpose in World War I. Just wouldn't have happened because they couldn't beat us. An Anglo-German alliance between 1900 and 1914 would have been impossible to beat. Would have just been impossible to beat. Especially given that Germany was like one of the leading industrial powers in the world. Britain was still one of the leading industrial powers in the world, and Britain was also the financial capital of the world at the time. No one could have absolutely fought those guys at all with any chance of victory. But that's my own view.
Well, you can totally just imagine, because I mean, you got the whole, because I mean, during the Napoleonic Wars, we were feeding money over to the lots of the Russians and the Austrians to fight Napoleon. You can totally imagine
all the time. Yep.
Well, yeah, it's quite funny when you get people who like seethe online about, but they say, "Oh, well, you Brit, like we Brits love to skimp out rather than actually fight," and get big continentals do all fight, and they go, "Well, what wouldn't you if you're in that position?" Would be my response, I suppose. It's like, I mean, it serves us well because we can pay off the Germans to fight off the Russians and French at the same time, while all the French colonies just fall one after the other, and thereby deprive the French. I don't know how materially rich the French heartland is for stuff like oil or coal or whatever, but I can't imagine
Not very.
that. Yeah, I can't imagine if, let's say, we starved their we deprived them of the resources of their colonies, whether we never blockaded them or just took over their colonies themselves, like we did to Germany. You can't imagine a French war machine lasting long. I mean, you also got to think, let's say Japan gets involved on the side of Germany. You can totally just imagine the Russian Far East gets invaded, like Vladivostok would fall pretty swiftly, and you've got Japanese troops all over Siberia.
I mean, look, even without an Anglo-German alliance, but without the entente between Britain and France, and later on Britain and Germany, just say there's no entente, but Britain is not an ally of Germany, all right? But we don't go to war in 1914. France loses in 1915 at worst for the Germans.
Well, yeah. I mean, like the French will see when you tell them this, but let's face it, France needed us to hold their hand on the Western Front because without us, they would have fallen. Probably.
Yeah, in 1915, at latest, France would have lost World War I. Absolutely. And that's not even with an Anglo-German alliance. That's just Britain doing what it should have done and stayed neutral. You know?
Well, I mean, the French do seethe about when you point that out, because I'm thinking at the end of the day, like the French, you look at the French army in World War One. At the end of the day, like they were not capable of taking on Germany by themselves. They had to have us help him.
They wouldn't. Well, look, they fought hard. They lost a lot of guys, but they would have lost without the British, and of course our old Commonwealth allies like Canada and Australia and New Zealand, etc. They would have lost in 1915 without any doubt whatsoever.
Well, I'm more thinking about how incompetent a lot of the French generals were, because they just endlessly attacked, because it was their military doctrine was just attack the enemy all day long and not focus too much on the defensive aspects of war. So then that just leads to heavy French casualties. Even in like the early stage of a war where the French suffered horrendous casualties in like border skirmishes in the early stage of a war. Imagine Germany against France 1-on-1. Like it would just be a repeat of 1870 to 1870.
Yeah, it would have been 1870. The French might have fought a bit longer, but they would have still lost. And good, as far as I'm concerned, because I'm a Brit and I don't care what happens to France at all. Not at all. Not even the slightest tiny bit. Which is what Britain's attitude should have been in 1914. Don't care what happens to France. I think we could have turned around and said to the Germans, even as neutrals, we could have said, look, if the Imperial German Navy comes into the North Sea, the Royal Navy will regard it as hostile and sink it. But if you don't do that, we're just neutral, boys. And I think the Germans would have just said, yeah, all right, we'll keep our fleet in the Baltic.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know how strong I can imagine the Russian Baltic Sea Fleet that was fully rebuilt. So I can imagine the German High Sea Fleet would have just pivoted to the Baltic and just smashed the
it absolutely could have destroyed the Russian Baltic Fleet. Yeah, for sure, mate. For sure.
Yeah.
Anyway, we've been doing historical what ifs for a long time now. Do either of you guys know anything about this stuff that I've been seeing in the chat about Bowden tapes, and people have been finding them and all the rest of it?
UKIP has said about it, and I think that I don't know what to call them, like esoteric chirurgy or something like that. I can't remember his handle name. They've been talking about like the buried tapes being released because Nick Griffin, he once replied to a guy saying it's not him who's got the tapes, it's someone else who's in PA who used to be part of the BNP who's actually got the tapes. They then, I think it was like someone close to UKIP who emailed. They then get the tapes, and now we've got previously unseen Bowden footage.
Well, I really hope that's true. I'm a big fan of Jonathan Bowden. He's, I don't know, the great right-wing orator of relatively recent years. When did he die? Was it 2011 or something like that? But yeah, I really hope that's true. I'd love to see some more tapes from Jonathan Bowden. Great orator, great dude on the right wing. So yeah. Bolero is saying, "Can you hear me now?" I don't know what he's talking about, but whatever. Adaman, have you heard anything about these Bowden tapes?
Yeah, I've heard that there's people working on them right now. I don't know how bad they're going to be. I assume these are also filmed on a potato, and of course, they probably are like actual tapes. So, you know, someone will need to.
I hope it's true, mate. I really do. I'd love to hear some more.
I trust the sources.
Bowden stuff.
Mm.
Okay. Bolero is saying that's. Can you hear me now? Yeah, these are Bowden thing. Fair enough. Michael K, 19th century fan, says, given Britain's imperial possessions, having good relations with France and Russia was more important than alliance with Germany. Not true, mate. I'm sorry. No, it's just not true. The Royal Navy was so much more powerful than the French and Russian navies. Like, even when the Germans tried to build this luxury fleet, which they didn't need, that made them the second biggest navy in the world, it was still far smaller than the Royal Navy. Go look at the Battle of Jutland. There's a really good thing on YouTube, which I put on Twitter not so long ago, of Andrew Lambert, who is the best living British naval historian, talking about the Battle of Jutland. I put it on my Twitter feed not so long ago, like a day or so ago. And it explains what happened at Jutland and how, if you think that was a German victory, like the Germans basically twice ran head on into the Grand Fleet, which was vastly stronger than they were. And the only way they escaped was by reversing the course of every ship and like turning around and running away as quickly as they possibly could. And a day after Jutland, the German Grand Fleet was basically wrecked, whereas the Royal Navy could still put to sea with a very powerful fleet and have beaten them. And basically the entire German Navy never came out again after 1916 because they realized what a narrow escape they had at Jutland.
Yeah, but they did down a few expensive ships of ours, though.
Yeah, they did, but the reason they did this was in the battlecruiser fleet, which was Beatty's fleet, and Beatty was a useless admiral, it has to be said. But in his fleet, all of the safety protections that were meant to stop these ships blowing up, like there were doors in between the turrets and the magazines that automatically shut after the ammunition had gone up, yeah? And the idea was that if the turret was hit and a flash, like an explosion, traveled down, those doors would stop that explosion getting to the magazines, yeah? And all of these things in the battlecruiser fleet, and only in the battlecruiser fleet, were removed in order to make the guns fire more quickly, basically. Because if you get like a 5-10 second delay because your flash doors are closing. But if you remove the flash doors, that's gone. But it also means if you get a hit on the turret and the explosion goes down into the magazine, the whole fucking ship blows up. And that's what happened with the 3 British battle cruisers at Jutland. And without that, Germany had no sort of fucking victory at Jutland, even by numbers of men killed, you know.
No, I'm just saying it was
yeah.
an expensive. It was a horrendously expensive battle on both sides.
Well, yeah.
I mean, we didn't want to
But
be
the Royal
losing too many
Navy,
of those big.
but
those big
without
ones, did we?
being a twat and allowing all these protections to be removed in order to make his battle cruisers, you couldn't hit fuck all anyway because they hardly ever trained. Without Beatty doing this, those battle cruisers, at least 2 of them, wouldn't have sunk because the flash protection would have stopped it. But anyway, whatever. Someone's asking my thoughts on Montgomery. Yeah. Auchinleck was better, is what I'd say, but that's just me. But Auchinleck didn't have anywhere near the stuff Montgomery got. But that's just me. What do I know? And it was Auchinleck who stopped Rommel at first Alamein. And all Montgomery had to do was beat him with like 3 times his forces at second Alamein. That's just my own view. But also Montgomery was nowhere near as bad as some Americans like Patton described it, who was jealous of him. But, you know, whatever. And also Montgomery rubbed everybody up the wrong way because he had no tact. Probably a bit like me in some respects, but anyway. So, yeah, that's my view on Monty. Best British general in World War II, without any doubt whatsoever, was Bill Slim. General Bill Slim in Burma, best British general in World War II. After him, I'd probably say the chap who did Operation Compass. Can't remember his name now.
O'Connor.
Gone out of my head. O'Connor, yeah, General O'Connor, second British general, best British general. The bloke who captured like 120,000 Italians with about 33,000 British and Commonwealth troops. So yeah, he was pretty good. But yeah, Bill Slim, Richard O'Connor, best 2 British generals of World War II. Okay. Did we have anything else we wanted to talk about, gents?
No.
Because I want to talk a little bit about the disaster of the Royal Navy, but do you, Adam and or Mitch, have something you want to talk about?
I am going to have to get off anyway.
No worries.
I might have to leave you to that one.
Thank you very much for joining us, and I'm always happy to have you on the stream.
Yeah, no problem. We should actually stream on Yuga at some point.
I beg your pardon?
We should actually do a stream on Ernst Yuga at some point, just to dedicate one based off what we, Storm of Steel and not.
Oh
just
yeah,
Steel,
no, I'd like to do
well.
that. That would be interesting, actually. Yeah, once you've read it, mate, tell me, and we'll do that for sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Once
well, I'll
you've
leave you guys
finished
to it.
Yeah, I'll happily do that. Happily do that, mate. Mitch, anything you wanted to talk about?
I don't know if you want to talk about any of the millennial streams.
Oh yeah, for sure. Because I haven't listened to all of them by any means, but
I've only listened
to quite a few.
I've mainly listened
to quite a few of them. Yeah.
Yeah, I've listened mainly to them. You had Semiagog. Then Godfrey Bloom was the first one I watched. Semiagog's Furious. I forgot to watch Lady of Shalott, so I need to watch that one.
I did see all 3 of those. Yes.
Yeah, it's like you had Godfrey Bloom, whose stream was. Half of it was him just talking about the fact that we've got an idiot for king, as well as and he talked about the war in Ukraine. You had Semyagog. You had Semyagog who just talked about because Semyagog, he's very Anglophile, so he's very interested in England, and he says like we're basically a very different culture from the Americans, even though we speak the same language.
Yeah,
I found his stream actually a bit most interesting because you had.
Yeah, I know an
Semyagog.
American goal. I know an American goal, babe, Mitch, and yeah, we are two nations separated by a common language. It's very true. But
yeah, because you have Semyagog, he was saying about because they're talking about the British sitcoms, which because I mean you even have like up until the 1980s, British sitcoms generally tend to be free from subversion, like Dad's Army and so on. But from the 1980s onward, that's when the subversion starts to set in, I believe.
Yep.
But also you had he says I think Semyagog who's talking about like stuff like how the language evolves. Like for example, there are some accents in England where you drop R's or you drop T's or drop whatever letter. Like for example,
guttural stops and all this kind of thing. Yeah.
So for example, I drop the H when it comes to words like house or hero. Well, actually not with hero because it's pretty essential to say the H in that. But I don't know. I mean, I can't remember what Semyagog said precisely, but he was just talking about all the different dialectical differences. I imagine it's one of the few in talking about someone like that, but with Italian dialects. Because I mean, I'd love to see what Furious would say about Italian dialects, because there's plenty of stuff to be found about how we talk about English dialects and accents. Because in some ways, I remember seeing an article where it said the accents and dialects of you get actually outline genetic divisions as well. Like for example, the Northerners genetically are more Germanic compared to the Southerners, who are more genetically mixed with the French, I believe. So I don't know what it would be like for Italy, because I know Italy is very genetically, I wouldn't say diverse, but they've had a lot of genetic stocks over the past 2,000 years from the Roman period onward. So
Okay.
I don't know what. Because he had Semyagog who talks about all the accents and dialects of the UK and all the.
Yeah, I like Semi's channel. I do. I don't think he totally understands Anglo-Celts, to be honest. But I like him. I think he's a sensible dude. But I don't think he totally understands Anglo-Celts, to be honest.
I mean, he is an American. I mean, isn't he like Italian or something like? He's got like Italian blood or something. So he's like, I don't know. I mean, he calls himself.
I think he's got various bits in him, yeah. But he's also travelled a bit, which tends to make people better, I think. You know, like he lived in Turkey.
It depends on which areas you travel
for a while.
Well, it depends on which areas you travel to. Like I've known people who travel to bloody India of all places, and some of them start to realise, actually, Indians aren't actually exactly this great, I don't know, spiritual people, but rather the country's actually a complete shithole. Or they come back from a place and just turn into these bleeding heart shitlibs who demand that we're taking every wave and strike on the other side of the English Channel.
Well, who was your Mitch? Who was your favorite millennial Yule?
I always go for Godfrey Bloom, to be honest, just because he's got very Godfrey Bloom, just because he's got very sort of military style sense of humor, where he would just like, for example, I remember like the first millennial he was on back in 2020, and he was talking about the Crackers English king, like, well, now our king, but back then Prince of Wales, and he called Greta Thunberg a little Swedish pixie girl who's slightly retarded.
Very true. Very true.
Yeah,
I like Godfrey Bloom. I don't think he's a bad guy at all. No.
Well, I mean, it's weird how you two are oceans apart and yet you're very similar, even though he's like what, 20 years older than you or something. because he was
I don't
born
know
in.
if he's. How old is he, babe? How old is he, Mitch?
Like Jeremy Corbyn, like I mean, he's 74, so I'm thinking he's.
Oh yeah,
also
okay, yeah,
49.
he is 20 years older than me. Okay. Yeah, more than 20
Yeah.
years older than me.
Yeah, because you're
So
you're 70.
yeah, I knew guys like Godfrey Bloom when I joined the British Army at 19 in 1983. There were a load of guys like Godfrey Bloom who were in the British Army, loads.
Yeah, just
As
about like very
officers,
sort of.
especially, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because he's got like I think Nigel Farage said it best. He's got a very military sense of humor, but it doesn't translate well into the sort of PC culture we have to watch our moves with. That's why Godfrey Bloom was.
Fucking bullshit, for sure, yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, for example,
Yeah.
he said Bongo Land like 10 years ago, and that caused a massive stink where he had to be let go from UKIP, I believe. Which
Absolutely, because you can't possibly say bongo land, because like I never in 1983 no British training sergeant ever showed me an AK-47 and said this is a great rifle, usable by any mission trained savage in the world. No, they never said that to me. But anyway.
yeah, but it's like it's like you got that Polish guy whose name that Polish guy from EU Parliament. I can't remember his name. Older fellow with that like who Sargon interviewed a while, but I can't remember his name now. Very eccentric. Godfrey Bloom is basically our version of that guy, but like, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
no, I
there's
like Godfrey Bloom. Like I said, I think he talks a lot of good sense. To be honest, he does.
Yeah, but you had
So
Furious, which
he was your favorite millennial Yule person, Mitch?
yeah, I watched. I mean,
Well,
I can't. I mean, I know I've watched more millennials, but I can't remember now who I watched other than, of course, Furious, Simia God, Godfrey Bloom. I can't remember who else.
yeah,
I
I watched Furious. I thought that was a good one. Semigog was a good one. There were a few others as well. Lady Charlotte was pretty good. She was good. So yeah, there were some good ones for sure. Yeah, I thought Lady Charlotte was good. Who's also trying to move out of Melbourne with her family, like her husband and her are trying to move out of Melbourne. And good on them. Yeah, so that was good. But I've definitely watched about 15 of the Millennial Yule so far. I will watch some more in due course. But yeah, the main guys I liked were pretty much the same guys. Morgoth was great, for sure.
I
I
remember watching bloody Richard Spencer when he was on live. Which
I haven't watched that one yet. I'm not a big Spencer fan, but I did watch Morgoth. He was good.
Yeah. Who else did I watch?
I think AA did go on Millennial. I'm sure AA was on Millennial.
Yes. Oh yeah. I forget Survivor Drive. I forget Survivor Drive goes on the Millennial because I would listen to him.
Yep.
He was mainly talking
Survivor
about
Drive is good. Yep.
Yeah. I mean, the main point of his stream was he was just talking about how the right doesn't really prioritize academic careers. Like, he just tells people go into a trade and just become builders or whatever. And I go, sure, yeah, but you need thinkers and whatnot. So there's that. I mean,
I'm just knowing what North Sea and Valero are saying in the chat, and I am not commenting because.
Well, I mean, did you see that spat between?
Get me in trouble. So there we go.
I mean, did you see that spat on Twitter between Sargon and Nomos Events? I believe it's called. I don't know what it's called. That that transgender animal that AI has on his streams.
Yep.
Yeah, that thing.
All I can say on this stream is that I am never going to have troons on this stream. I'm just not. I'm sorry. If you're a troon, you're not on the right, as far as I'm concerned. Not
it's a
gonna happen.
pity that. Yeah, I don't know why people excuse that aspect, but I don't know, to each their own, I suppose. But I mean,
You know, if somebody like Liz the Unit wants to come on air who has a medical condition, fine. I don't have a problem with that. No, this is me, mate, not you. This is me.
No,
I
I'm
don't
talking.
have
I was just
problem.
no. I was saying I don't know who that is. I was saying I don't
All
know
right.
who that is.
Well, Liz the Unit's a pretty well-known person in our sphere. But if you got a medical condition, yeah, all right then. But if you're an actual troon and you try and give yourself a girl's name and this kind of stuff, particularly if like you're with a gay dude who is having sex with you, because that's what's going on if you're a troon, nah, you're not coming on my stream. It's never gonna happen. Never gonna happen.
Yeah.
And North Sea, you know what? I am not always the biggest Sargon fan, but in that particular instance, I might kind of support Sargon a bit. Because I'm a right-wing reactionary traditionalist. I'm sorry, I don't support drones. I just don't. Don't understand anyone who does either, but that's just me. Just me.
Yeah. So yeah. Yeah. I don't know why. It's like I mean, I remember, for example, watching. Who was it now? What was it? Glory Club. For some reason, it's only put it then as half watched.
Yeah, Old
With,
Glory Club is generally pretty good. I like the dudes on there, like Red Hawk and Charlemagne and what's his name, the dude with the frog thing. Yeah, I like those guys. Old Glory Club is a good American channel. I'm quite fond of those guys.
Yeah, but that's the thing. I mean, I don't really know much of Red Hawk, to be honest. I mean, it's like, I mean, you'll see him on like Twitter where he'll just do takes about how, okay, on one hand, there are women who are just complete OnlyFans whores, and you have to make your peace with that. Well, not make. Well, I don't know how best to put it, but he's also saying,
I'll say one thing to you, Mitch, is that Lady Charlotte likes Red Hawk. She likes him, and Lady Charlotte is probably the most trad Christian woman you could think of. Like, she's a married lady with 3 kids. She homeschools kids, and she likes Red Hawk. So that like absolutely biases me to liking Red Hawk because she's
I don't know why
so,
Red Hawk gets a lot of hate in these circles. Because I mean, I've noticed on Twitter there's also quite a few people who hate Red Hawk. I don't fully know why, we just do. So I don't know what you make of that.
Yeah.
Because I mean,
it's because it's because he's related to pickup artists. That's why.
I mean, I can understand.
Which
I mean,
are basically just blokes who are trying to tell women. But pickup artists are just blokes, and I'm sure he would have a more detailed explanation of this than I will ever come out with. But what Red Hawk is doing is he's trying to help young white men meet women, basically, and be able to have relationships with them. And to me, that's a good thing. So there you go.
Because when you can think of that term pickup artist, you think of someone like, I don't know, some fat 50-year-old Westoid who goes on to Southeast Asia.
Red Hawk says, you know, you meet the girl, you get her to come and go out on a date with you, and then what you do with her, whether you turn her into a girlfriend and then a wife, is up to you, you know, which it is, to be fair.
Well, the thing is, I mean, I think people know my views on the type of women I would go for. Like, you know, like let's say yippies, like I don't know, pagan bands like Highland or whatever, where the women who are into those such bands, or you know, give a black metal scene or whatever. Chances are you get some of those women who'll be more. I mean, generally, like those kind of women, they're not the man-hating types. I mean, you can get them, but you're less likely in most circles.
Don't disagree.
So it's like that's.
I don't disagree with any of that, mate. I don't.
Yeah, because there's a big. I mean, let's say like you take a pagan band, like, I know, let's say Highland, for example. Let's say you get a girl who's into a band like that. okay, that's something which you have to go out your way somewhat in life to come across a band like that, because it's not really mainstream music at all, but it's very firmly rooted in like old, like pre-Christian culture. So you're going out your way to seek something that's very deep rooted in your country. Chances are more
Yeah,
likely than not
yeah.
that a girl who's into that can be molded into this scene, but be like a pagan version of Lady of Shalott, if I were to put it that way.
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying, man. Yeah, like
Yeah.
I said, I'm not against anybody who teaches our people to get a girlfriend or get a boyfriend or whatever, you know. But I am not in favor of shrooms at all. Just not.
Well, like as I said, well,
Shrooms are
the thing
not,
about the
you know, transvestites are not right wing, and they can never be right wing, as far as I'm concerned.
I think like the thing is, you get the phrase "pickup artist," and people think instantly they think of someone like, I don't know, that Johnny FD character who when you look at him, I think he's like Mongolian but born in America, and he spends his time just lusting after Ukrainian women looking for clout in Eastern Europe.
Yeah,
Almost.
yeah.
That's why people probably hate the term pickup artist. I mean, that's the image you get, well, like of some exploitative guy like that, quote unquote, who just goes over to Eastern Europe because he thinks girls are easier to deal with or whatever.
All I would say is that, like, as a young man, and I'm not a young man anymore, but as a young man, there are ways that you can get women to like you, and ways that you can get women not to like you. And anyone who is telling young men how to get women to like you is a good thing in a situation where we are now, where birth rates are ridiculously low, and quite a lot of white dudes think they can't get a girlfriend. I mean, I'm sorry, we need to change that. We have to change that.
Well, I think of it just this way. I mean, at the end of the day, there's plenty of guys who are online in these circles who, when you look at them, you just think, well, surely a guy like me. I mean, you take me, right? I can give you the skinny on plenty of history, but the thing is, what good is all my information? What good is all my takes on stuff if I don't have children who are then
Yep.
schooled later on in traditions? You know, if
Yeah,
there's not
and
one of
who
me
you can
making
teach
4
the
babies,
things you know. Yeah.
yeah, that's just how I
So,
put it. It's just at the end of the day, you know, you get plenty of guys on Twitter in our circles, but what good are all those guys on Twitter when, let's say, they all die off tomorrow and we've got no children to bear their genes and be taught the ways of our people?
yeah.
What good is all their
You
work?
look, you can't get a wife unless you can get a girlfriend. You know, you just can't. You know,
Well, it's not
you
that. It's
have to
just,
get
I
a
mean,
girlfriend before you can get a wife.
well, it's not just that. I mean, you know, even if, let's say, you don't, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't really do much. I mean, I'd say in the grand scheme of things, I haven't really done much other than, I don't know, let's say I have conversations with people in our scene, because you get Horvers, for example, who came up with that operation, whatever it was called, like to get like normie conservatives onto our side with varying degrees of success. But like, I don't know, let's say stuff like that can be useful, but it's also, at the end of the day, if let's say you have like a part, like, because I mean, apparently in Germany, I think, I can't remember what's called, Reichsburger or something like that, where German nationalists are buying loads of land in rural Germany to build up like housing for all their nationalist families. That should just be what, like, at the end of the day, something like that is what, I mean, I can do as many of these streams as I like, but if I were to do something like that, if I were to win mega bucks tomorrow and just buy up a huge slop of land in like northeast Yorkshire or whatever, that's decent farmland as well. That does a lot more than me spurging online about Anglo-Saxons.
Mitch, I tell you, I watched that stream yesterday, I think, of the Sargon dude who went into European Russia. Yeah.
Yeah.
The Britannia YouTube channel, and I just thought
Callum.
you should go do it. You should go and do stuff like that, man. You really should, because you can actually speak the language, so you could kind of like talk to actual Russians, I'd go and do that if I was you, mate. I really would.
Yeah, it's like you got North Sea in terms of land is very cheap in Northern Scotland. I think the only issue with Northern Scotland is how fertile the land is there. I think that's the only issue there is if you want to grow the community.
The reason there were crofters up there in the old days is that you probably can't make enough. You can't make a living off the land. You can absolutely grow vegetables and so on, but in order to survive, you got to fish as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't imagine, like, well, let's say we turn the Highlands as just some massive nationalist zone or whatever, like we just completely settled all over the land to a point where the Highlands is just pretty much like a nationalist area. We were always voting in MPs, even, and councillors and all the rest of it. You can totally just imagine, like, I know, and let's say we have a really good birth rate, like above replacement. It's not just that. I mean, let's say we had a healthy community. Do you reckon that a lot of normies would flock over to us just to think, oh, well, this is a firmly deep-rooted community that is actually providing me a way to find purpose in life?
Mitch, did you see Putin's offer recently? Mitch, did you see Putin's offer recently on Twitter, /X? Whereas he said anyone who goes to fight for Russia in the special military operation, they and their families will get given land in Russia.
Yeah, I mean, I think Putin's doing that for years.
Of course, you had all these Western twats going. Evil bastard! He's just trying to bribe people, and yet there were loads of British and American mercenaries, idiots, in my opinion, early in the special military operation who went and fought for Ukraine, and very often, and all Putin is saying now is, if you go and fight for Russia in Ukraine, and you don't die, obviously, we'll give you some land and you can bring your family in. Seems all right to me. I don't think that's bad thing at all.
I don't know why people see that over that, because I mean, at the end of the day, it takes two to tango with something like called a bribe. So
yeah, if you go risk your life, they'll give you some land. Kind of sounds like the sort of thing that the Americans would do in the 19th century, or the Brits would do in Rhodesia and places like this. That is exactly the sort of thing that we used to do back then, So, just what I think.
Yeah, I mean, I can totally just imagine. Let's say, for argument's sake, we were to completely just take over the Highlands in, let's say, 20 years' time, so that it just become a completely nationalist area. Do you reckon that also loads of normies from other parts of the country, they'll just come over to us anyway, because they just go, oh, well, in their lives, let's say in West Midlands or wherever, their lives are pretty crap. But then we see these nationalist areas where people are actually deeply rooted. There's, I don't know.
Well, obviously, yeah. Yeah, to me, that is exactly what would happen. Because obviously in nationalist community, I mean, look, loads of Americans have been doing this for a while now, which is a bigger country, of course, than Britain. But yeah, I mean, loads of people have been doing this for ages, and loads of people I like Dave the Distributist or Don the Pleb, etc. They've all been saying for a long time now, like, get a local community together who all have the same kind of beliefs. And you're going to be stronger than if it's just one family. And, to me, that's just completely obvious.
Yeah, I just don't know how. I mean, you can totally just imagine a lot of a pagan versus Christian divide would put a spanner in that works to some degree, unless the pagans and Christians just split off.
Well, if it is taken to an extreme, yeah. But I mean, as we said earlier, my own belief is it shouldn't be. And we need allies, not enemies. But that's just me.
Well, I mean, on one hand, I can sympathise with the pagans, but I can also sympathise with the Christians to some degree on a cultural basis. And I'm thinking, well, we might as well just all have the views of Tolkien, where at the end of the day, our Christian history, it's there, and there's no getting rid of it. But at the same
Yeah,
time,
and
you
Tolkien
spit
combined
on.
them. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've got my
Tolkien
pagan
combined them,
sympathies.
absolutely.
Yeah, but that's the thing, Robo, is many pagans are not willing to go that road because I mean, I don't know how Jewish Christianity is. I don't really know how. I mean, I can see that some of their arguments as being valid, but at the same time, they're very confrontational and aggressive. But on the other hand, the Christians don't help themselves by also being very just dismissive of pre-Christian traditions. So it's like both sides just need their heads knocking together into some sort of compromise. But failing that, you can totally just imagine you just have to have like separate communities, I suppose. And let's say one community for Christians. I mean, 5 miles down the road will just be one for only pagans. I suppose what would happen.
Well, look, my view is that I really like people like Dave the Distribuist, who's a tramcaf. I really like Survive the Drive. And I'd really like to see Dave the Distribuist and Survive the Drive do a stream together. And I don't think they would disagree on a lot, to be honest.
Well, I mean, David Distributist doesn't act like a complete arsehole in terms of like the pagan.
No, Dave's a good, sensible bloke.
Doesn't do the same either. Yeah, like
Yeah,
neither of those
100%,
two are
100%.
like neither of those are confrontational about the whole pagan versus Christian divide. So it could work.
You see,
I'm just
this is the thing that's the way you've got to be, to my view. Like, if you're a trad Christian, okay, be like Dave the Distributor. And if you're like a pagan, be like Survive the Drive, Tom Morales, be like him. That's my view. And those two guys will get on fine for the most part. There are some things they will disagree with, but given we don't have any sort of power at the moment, none of them are important. Let's have allies, not enemies. That's my own view.
Yeah. I mean, do we dare move on to the absolute shambles of the Royal Navy now? Because what is it?
I was going to talk about this, Mitch, but honestly, 2 Royal Navy frigates going to be scrapped. One of them, at least, has been being refitted for the last year and a half. No crew. Both Royal Navy amphibious assault ships. Both of them are going to be mothballed because they can't crew even one of them. As far as I'm concerned, like, if you're going to make the Royal Navy about feminism, diversity, and LGBTQ bullshit, you're not going to get recruits. The Royal Navy needs to be, as it always was traditionally, a military naval service where young men join for adventure. And you also probably need to go up their pay a little bit. And do that, and you'll get enough sailors. But if you're going to do what Forces News in UK does, which is a British Ministry of Defence, British taxpayer funded channel, which does nothing whatsoever. Its colours are Ukrainian. They're not British. They're just Ukrainian, the yellow and blue. But everything it does on that channel is either feminist, diversity in terms of non-Anglo-Celtic white people, and LGBTQ. It's all it does. 90% of its time. That's all it talks about. And this is a British Ministry of Defence taxpayer Navy can't recruit sailors. Well, what a bloody surprise.
Well, so you remember that video? It was something like, it was obvious. I can't remember, it was like a freighter or something, like just some ship sailing the North Sea amidst of very stormy weather. You had plenty of guys beneath that post who were just saying, "Oh, I'd love to do something like this just to see how it would fare in like a situation like that." There are plenty of guys who probably would have a stomach to actually serve in the Royal Navy, but because of the way the armed forces have gone, in terms of spitting on actual
back in the day, mate. I mean, And also, the Royal Navy, unless you're in a certain ship, goes nowhere anymore. It doesn't go anywhere anymore. Oh, you might go to the Baltic. Well, great. Or you might go to the Mediterranean, but anywhere else? No, hardly any ships go anywhere anymore.
Well,
until,
when
of
you think
course,
of
the Royal Navy is called on to go and die in defense of Taiwan, and then we'll sail over there and all our blokes will die because our ships are not well enough armed. But who cares about that, right? Royal Navy sailors are very cheap.
Well, yeah, it's like that's the thing. All those, you can well imagine about plenty of Englishmen all over the country who just they'd snap up the opportunity of being able to serve on a ship, even test themselves in stormy weather, or overall just sail overseas, even if it's just fishing or whatever. I would be up for that.
But Mitch, 100%, and I totally agree with you. And this was the traditional Royal Navy, but the political admirals who run the Royal Navy today, and Indian banker Rishi Sunak, who is supposedly British Prime Minister, although if he's British, then I'm obviously a Zulu. These people don't care about that stuff anymore, and they're not recruiting sailors, even though the Royal Navy is easily the most important British armed force. You know what? Britain can survive with a little tiny army. It can. It's an island. It can even survive with a relatively small Royal Air Force, which it definitely has now. But it absolutely must have a strong Royal Navy because it's an island trading nation that depends on merchant ships coming into its ports. And the British government and nobody else, British government and lefty civil servants, have destroyed the Royal Navy over the past 20 years, and nobody else ever did. In 1982, at the time of the Falklands War, the Royal Navy had 70 destroyers and frigates, 2 aircraft carriers and 2 more building, and about 12 SSN nuclear-powered hunter-killer submarines. Today, the Royal Navy has 15 or 16 destroyers and frigates, 2 aircraft carriers that we don't even have enough F-35B fast jets to make 1 full air group, never known 2, and 6 or 7 SSN nuclear-powered hunter-killer submarines. The Royal Navy has been destroyed, and it's been destroyed by the British government. And I mean the British government under the so-called conservatives, in air quotes, of course, because they're not. They don't conserve anything. And also under Tony Blair, who destroyed the Royal Navy very, very heavily to prosecute his war, his useless and pointless war in Afghanistan, which was so useless and pointless that when the Brits withdrew from it, we even had to take a war memorial home to UK because they knew damn well what the Afghans would have done to it. But anyway, that's just me.
Well, yeah, I remember Semyagog once saying on the stream long ago that the Iraq War was actually one of the most pointless wars because it also destroyed the American reputation. Because before
Iraq and Afghanistan were both totally pointless. Pointless. All they did was kill loads of civilians and loads of our soldiers. It's all they did.
Yeah, it's not just
nothing else whatsoever. They gained us nothing.
Well, you consider America back in the 1990s. It was at its apex culturally. Everyone looked up to America. The Russians, they wanted to be like America. They failed at it because privatization really failed for them and whatnot. But literally everyone wanted to be like America, or like the West in general. Fast forward to 2004 with the Iraq War, or 2003, I should say, when the Iraq War started. All of a sudden, the Anglosphere is now looked upon with disdain by many people, like the Russians, Middle East, parts of Asia. Now they have disdainful towards us because they just see us as just.
Totally agree, mate. Totally agree.
Yeah, that's one reason why I hate Tony.
Totally you're not wrong. Because you're totally right.
Yeah. I mean, this is a point made by Semyagog, where he says because he said back in 20 years ago, or 25 years ago, Americans could go anywhere over the world, and everyone would look up to them. Fast forward to what George W. Bush did, and that reputation is down in tatters, and everyone hates him.
Oh yeah, 100.
Yeah, it's like you have the Red Sea shipping.
Anything you wanted to? Is there anything you would like to plug?
If anyone wants to follow my Twitter, because I've just been spoken about, I don't know, the different phenotypes of the British.
All right, what's your Twitter, mate? You want to tell people?
At Anglo, that little dash under space thing, Gopnik, which I mean,
yeah, Anglo Gopnik. I thought so.
Yeah, and it's like
Mitch, are you still thinking of doing this Old English stream you were talking about for Christmas?
Yeah, I mean, I keep procrastinating, but I will do it at some point. That's my only issue. I keep procrastinating.
No, if you want to do it, mate, I'll host it on my channel for you easily. But like, I'm going to be a very much lay guest because I'm no expert on that stuff. But yeah.
Well, it's like is I don't know. I feel like there were some points where, I don't know, if I were to talk to all, I can't talk all about grammar because it's so boring, that aspect. I mean, the only conclusion there is from that aspect of Old English is it's so bloody hard that it's a great thing English is the way it is today in terms of being very simplified. Like, you don't have to think about changing the endings of words according to what purpose they serve in a sentence anymore, like other languages do. And you don't have to deal
say
with
that Aubrey in the chat is quite funny. Yeah. All right. But yeah. All right. I'm going to play us out of a tune. Mitch, you'll like this one, I think, because it's from your part of the world. So.
Nothing like boomer tech issues at the beginning and ending of a stream, I suppose. Don't know what bloody old is going to happen. I'm going to guess that Duke's going to come back on in like a minute. I don't know if he's going to capitulate against like the boomer tech issue of his borrowed laptop or whatever, or if he's just going to play it again and hope for the best.
Okay, what?
You got your blue camera on, like all like, very blurry skin, as opposed to your profile angle.
Don't worry.
Oh, he's gone again. Bloody hell. Let's see. What's your manual? What's in there? JF, it's not been seen one of these days. I have a Pox Popular. I don't know that much, man. Oh, I forgot to watch Game Dankula. Can't believe I missed that one. I mean, there's Morgoth, which I need to watch for, but 6.5 hours. Fucking hell. 6.5 hours, man. That's a little pretty long.
Okay, is that working?
I can hear you now.
Ah, cool. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
guys.
Yeah, Mike's saying you should just download the music. But to be fair, you want to borrow the laptop, ain't you? So you can't exactly just download the video straight off and play it.
No. But yeah, hang on. I'll get it to play. Wait, guys. Really, Yorkie, happy to have heard this. There we go. Now, I should play. Okay. There we go. Quick march of the North Staffordshire Regiment, and anyone who was observant will have noticed in the illustration they had a couple of pioneers at the front with beards and axes, which is how pioneers used to be in the British Army in the late 19th century. Mitch, thank you very much for joining me this evening, mate. We've gone 2.5 hours, which is a long time. Mike the Brummie, can he just not download the music? Not on a borrowed computer from my neighbor friend? No, I can't. Should have watched the beginning, mate. You would have seen it. But anyway. Orby says that wasn't meant to be funny. To which I would reply, there are many things that I do which are not meant to be funny. But anyway, but yeah, thanks, Mitch. Thank you also to Alman earlier on. And we'll be back next week with Splendid Isolation number 155. So yeah, go well, folks. We'll check you out later.